Do you know what? I think a nice place to start is certification. Mark, there's a bit of a misunderstanding when it comes to certification. Even I was quite surprised when you started going through it with us off air. Do you want to give a rundown on how the certification process for the eVTOLs works?
Yeah, I can give it a shot. And we had discussed this offline at one point about potentially me making some content, which can give just a what we call in the aerospace industry a 50,000 foot overview, and then from that you can dive down and really focus in on the different aspects of it. But in the context of what Joby and Archer are going through now is and their certification process, what they are aiming for is what's called TC, or a type certification. And that is it's a well-defined process. And this is, one thing when you are when you're everybody who is going to deliver an aircraft that's going to be used for commercial purposes has to have a type certification. The airplane sitting behind me is a Mooney, and it had to get a type certification before it could be sold to the general public. Um, and the it varies based on what the airplane will be used for. And so if the regulations, you hear people say, "Oh, it's going to get certified in Part 91." Part 91 is just a reg for general aviation. And I suspect I don't know for sure, and I'll double check it. This will be part of my own research that I'll do, but I'm pretty sure that eVTOLs will most likely be certified in Part 91. Then you have larger aircraft, anything that's over 12,500 pounds, and has, I think, over 9 passengers, needs to be Part 25. And that is where you get into like Gulfstreams, Cessnas, Bombardiers, Hawkers, if you're, or not Hawkers, but, oh man, Dassaults, like a Falcon jet. Shout out to our European counterparts as well. When you get to that level, you're developing in Part 25, and again, it's a similar flight. It's a similar type certification, with the exception that those are more complex airplanes. So and they fly at higher altitudes. They go through more rigorous weather. Um, for example, you heard Brandon previously say that the hover aircraft will be FIKI certified,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and FIKI is flight into known icing. The airplane behind me is not FIKI certified. If there's ice, you turn around immediately and get away from it, or you just avoid it at all costs. But any airliner that you get on, or any aircraft that gets FIKI certified, then it has heat going into the leading edges, or it has boots that expand and contract, and pretty much that. So the certification, like that would be when I talk about the 50,000 foot overview of getting a TC, that whole roadmap. FIKI would be, a small subset of that roadmap, and that is
Okay.
something you'd have that is a part of the flight test program that you have to first design. You have to do company test, and then when you're ready, then you write test plans. Those test plans have to be approved by the authorities, by the FAA. And once those test plans are approved, then you go and you conduct the test. um, and and then you prove that what you were originally designing for that meets its intent, or is functional. And of course, there are just within FIKI certification, like the United States has icing tunnels, NASA has icing tunnels where you can go and they can actually simulate ice and the airplane flying through ice in that wind tunnel. So you don't have to go necessarily and demonstrate it out with your airplane in nature. You could theoretically just put a scale model in a wind tunnel,
That's
prove
it.
that it works, and then But typically, actually, let me back up a little. Typically, you're doing that to prove company test, and then you will go and demonstrate it for the FAA. And then the FAA will say, yes, okay, you've passed that subset. So you are, maybe 5% there. What you'll see with eVTOLs when they start getting their credit is just the air handling qualities of the airplane. You hear people talk a lot about transition, where they're actually going from a hover to a real flight configuration.
Yeah.
Yeah, that transition is very critical because the wing's not flying yet, but your lift fans they're sharing, the capability of just keeping the craft in the air. So demonstrating that and getting through that'll be another subset and of just the certification process. And all of those little subsets need to be demonstrated to the FAA. And what's also another caveat to certification is within each one of these small subsets, say you have propulsion, they're called designated engineering representatives. And when I spoke about it last week, those are people that the FAA recognizes as experts in those small subset. So you'll have a mechanical systems DER, and you'll have a FIKI, flight into known icing DER. You'll have a air handling or air qualities or flight control qualities DER, and each one of those are involved in seeing that the engineering that you are designing meets the intent of what you want to do. Then they sign off on that design, and then it has to go and be demonstrated by very specific flight test pilots who can perform those tests. And a lot of times the company has their own pilots, but then the FAA brings in their pilots to actually get credit. So it's a very, very, it's a long process, but it's a mountain that needs to be climbed. Everybody needs to climb it. And what's great about it, but that is also, those are metrics that can be tracked. So what we were discussing is, and one thing I want to start getting involved with is, as Archer and Joby and Hover are going through this process, we can start to follow that roadmap and
Yeah.
basically be like, okay, how far are they up Mount Everest? We could even be like, they're at base camp 1 and they're not even in the danger zone yet, right? Like there's all sorts of things that we as value investors could start tracking. And then when they come on their conference calls, they could say, well, this is where we're at. And again, I mean, they have fiduciary responsibilities, so they can't, the different companies have to be honest. So there's a very, sort of back to rehash it, there's a very, very defined process in certification, and that's just to get type certification.
Yeah.
Then once you have type certification, you can then deliver your aircraft to customers, or you can go and start a 135 charter and start flying services, which is the goal. But the next step is there's another certification, which is the manufacturing side. And that side is you prove to the FAA, and it'll be the FAA here because these aircraft are going to be built in the United States, that your processes are always going to be the same. So that when the aircraft rolls off the line, it is exactly the same as the one before it. And that is when you hear, if that airplane has a deviation and it comes off the line and it has a discrepancy, it's technically not airworthy then. And you have to go back and you have to fix that discrepancy before the airplane can be delivered. Like I can't go and put different screws on the airplane behind me because it'll then technically be unairworthy.
Yeah.
And because it's a certified airplane. So the manufacturing process as well, and this is important for investors to understand. When they say they're going to produce 10,000 aircraft in 1 year, they could potentially do that. but they have to have a very, very well automated, most likely a very well automated assembly line that is approved by the authorities, and they have to follow that every time. So when ship
And
number 10 comes off the line, it is exactly the same as ship number 140. And
is
if
it
it's
like
not this,
do they do it per like factory then that you get that certification to make sure that factory is there like a factory's approved, or is it just your process is approved?
it would be the process. Of course, like they're only going to have. Well, I mean, I guess you have a good point. They're doing these smaller factories right now.
That's what I
You
was
know,
thinking.
Joby has their factory out in California, but then they're talking they're going to build a bigger factory in Dayton, Ohio. Um, and that is their scaled factory. So they are probably proving out all of that certification at that factory, and then they can go and scale it
Yeah.
at their Dayton facility once it's finished.
And I imagine
So
can they both run simultaneously with both of these certification processes, even though
yes,
they're
and you
not
do,
finished at this moment in time, but they can
and
still get the manufacturing certificate?
that is yes, that's a perfect question. Typically, they run at this they run at the same time, or you're developing both of those at the same time. So when you get TC, you also have TI. It's called TC, and then you have TIA. And forgive me, I don't know what the acronym is. If there's anybody in the chat that does and can shout it out what a TIA is without looking it up on Grok, or I'll come fly to you and we'll go for a flight. If you're in the United States and on the Eastern Seaboard, uh, but yes, they do. You basically you typically want to get type certification, and you want to get your TIA or your manufacturing cert right at the same time. Um, and in the case of larger established companies, um, you know, you will sometimes have your manufacturing will start going ahead of you to where you're going to have 10 or 15 airplanes sitting all on the manufacturing floor and could be ready to be delivered, and you
Yeah.
don't have your type certificate yet. I know that with one of the recent large private jet manufacturers with the release of one of their new aircraft, that was the case where they got their type certification, and they had 10 or 15 airplanes just sitting waiting to be delivered, and they couldn't deliver because they didn't have their TC, and the manufacturing line was ready to go. And it's like, okay, as soon as we get past these last few tests, these cert tests,
Yeah.
we're going to get TC, and then we're going to deliver a bunch of airplanes. And that's exactly what happened. So it's a really cool, I mean, it's a fascinating process within the aerospace industry. Of course, and this is, I talk about this mountain that needs to be climbed. Um, you know, typically, I think HondaJet, they invested about $1 billion on their factory and their certification and everything for their HJ 420. I think it was about $1 billion investment. I mean, you look at Archer right now and their mark cap, they've already got the money for that runway. So
Yeah.
now they're just at the point of, hey, who do we got to pay to support us to get this rolling? So I may make it sound like, oh, it's a huge mountain to climb, and it may sound like, oh, they're not going to get there till past the Olympics. I don't necessarily believe that. I think that they could really, especially with the certain executive orders that have come out, that executive order that recently came out to say that's basically saying to the FAA, whatever resources you need, you've got, because
Okay.
we don't want to lag behind. And also, just it came out last week, I believe, in Paris, where the different authorities, the FAA, EASA, which is the European authority, and then I think the authorities in the Middle East, they're all finally agreeing, yes, let's all work together so that, and what that means is as soon as they get a type certification in the United States, then the other authorities will recognize that type certification as well.
And will it be the opposite way? If they get type certification in Europe or the Middle East, then the FAA will accept it? Is that sort of a loophole like around it, or?
Yeah, I think what you could see is the Middle East could grant them a type certification to operate, maybe a little bit ahead of schedule, and the
Yeah.
FAA may be like, we want to see a couple more things. But I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, they're all going to be in concert. If I was a betting man, I would think that you're going to have the FAA will lead on it,
Yeah.
just because these are being developed in the United States. And I think the other authorities, they may grant them some things so they can just say, hey, look, we are ahead. It looks very good for, I mean, the Middle East is wanting to really show that they are stepping out into the next wave of technology,
Yeah.
so that they may grant some deviations. And you get that a lot. Like you can have an airplane get a type certification, but it's a limited type certification. So, and that has happened where like a small business jet gets certified, but it doesn't have its FICI certification yet. It's flight into known icing. So they'll be like, okay, yeah, you can go and deliver these aircraft, but they cannot fly in icing. And so there is that as well. And potentially you could see the authorities in other countries grant those limited authorities as they're developing. And then that would allow them to start doing their routes and do revenue generating um, uh, flights.
Yeah.
But again, the mountain, it's a mountain to climb, but this is the first time in my career, and I've been in this industry since the early 2000s. So I've seen multiple certification programs at different levels, and this is the first time I have seen the federal government be so on board to say, yes, we are going to support this new type of aircraft and this new, just this new mode of transportation, because it is completely different. How you're marrying a helicopter to, or you're doing the synergy of a helicopter to an airplane back to a
Yeah.
helicopter. I think that the federal government recognizes that there are so many use cases to these new flying aircraft, and to be fair, they're actually, the powertrain is a lot more simplistic. Uh, an electric powertrain is far more simplistic than what what has previously been certified. And that's another point too. Like the engine needs to be certified, the avionics need to be certified, the airframe itself needs to be certified. Every component that goes on that airplane has to be certified for that particular airplane. So just to that point, um, to go back years back in the early 2000s, you had the Eclipse jet in the United States, and it was going to be this very light jet. It was going to revolutionize the market, and their original engine was way underpowered. So they then had to go to a different engine manufacturer and say, okay, we need an engine that can meet the performance that we're aiming for, and that set them back years. But a turbine engine is a very, very complex machine in itself. An electric motor, relatively, is very, very simple. So you can scale that very quickly. And the fact that you
Yeah.
have multiple motors, on a lot of, like this airplane here, it's certified, but it's only got one motor. If the fan stops spinning, the pilot starts sweating because you've just become a glider. So, so the redundancy with all of these motors that are going to be on these these eVTOLs adds an enormous amount of safety elements to it that will much quicker get them through certification. And the design of an electric motor is far less complex in terms of moving parts, in terms of components. So again, that 1/3 of an airplane, because typically it's the airplane, it's the airframe, it's the avionics and systems, and then it's the propulsion system. Simplifying that propulsion system makes it drastically will makes the climb not so steep of having to climb that mountain.